And then if it would have passed in the Senate, you would have seen our supporter wrote it in the House a whole lot as well, where they only needed the majority, and they might have gotten it. And it would not have been a bill that we would have liked, necessarily. So my argument is, we should seize moral high ground. We should write the bill in a way that works for us. I work with Senators Manchin and Toomey, and get criticized by some other gun groups for doing it. But the logic behind it was, do it in a way that protects gun rights and extends our rights at the same time. So our side, unfortunately, wasn't exactly intellectually honest and candid about what Manchin Toomey really did. The other side, I expect to lie all the time. But when it comes from my side, you know, I hold our people to a higher standard, and not all of our organizations were actually being honest about it. As an example, Manchin Toomey was not a universal background check, despite that it's there all the time. Manchin Toomey was labeled as Manchin Toomey's Schumer bill. Well, the Schumer bill is what Manchin Toomey would take out as a substitute amendment against it, knocking it out. It wasn't part of the Schumer bill. Schumer had nothing to do with Manchin Toomey, didn't want it to happen, and helped scuttle it, which I'll get into in a minute. But the idea, the concept behind Manchin Toomey was it would only apply to sales of guns in a commercial environment, not between friends, people that know each other, or relatives. It would only be sales, it wouldn't just be transfers defined to be handing you a gun to go skeet shooting. And, you know, right now under federal law, and the federal background check through licensed dealers, there's supposed to be no registration system kept. Well, the truth of the matter is, there is no registration system kept. I, with the people at the Bureau of Alcohol and Tobacco Firearms, have had the opportunity to explore the databases that they keep and what they've got. And in fact, there is no bill record keeping kept right now. But it could happen. And can any of us trust our government? I don't think so. Not when you're seeing the NSA and everything else going on. So my concept was, well, right now the law says it can't be used for registration. There are no teeth in the law that prohibit the government from, or penalize anybody for misusing the data, from creating a registration system to leaking it to the media so your name appears in the newspaper that you bought a gun. So we had worked into Manchin Toomey a clause that would give anybody, including the Attorney General of the United States, a 15-year prison sentence for misusing the data. That's teeth in the law we don't have right now. The other thing would be, if under Manchin Toomey, we have things in there thrown in that we've been trying to pass in Congress for years that we couldn't have gotten passed. And Obama would have been forced to sign it, and I would have loved watching him having to do it. As an example, you can't buy a handgun in the state you don't live in. Well, if it's the same damn background check happening, you know, nationally, why shouldn't you be able to buy a gun across state lines? That would have been in there. Likewise, additional protections for traveling across state lines with firearms. One of the key states that screws people up with that is New Jersey, when you're traveling through New Jersey. We would have rectified that problem in Manchin Toomey. Also, all our returning veterans, who now, by the Veterans Administration, can't buy a firearm because they went through mental evaluation coming out of the military, they would have all now been able to appeal to show that there's nothing wrong with me and I can now own a gun. Right now under federal law, there's nothing they can do. They can't own a gun. We had a whole bunch of other safeguards built into that as well. One of the agreements I had made was that, and Senator Manchin worked very closely with me on this, one of the key things that's been bothering me and sticking in my throat for years is right now under federal law, somebody who commits a felony that's non-violent, non-drug related, under federal law can get your rights back, but can't, because there's a catch-22, thanks to Senator Schumer, who's killed all the funding that the Justice Department cannot do the background check on that person to restore their rights. So there's no way that you appeal and then you get a letter back saying, great, the law says you can apply to get your rights back, but we can't process your application. But that Schumer threw a fit and would not allow that to be in the main bill. But I had an agreement from Manchin, who got an agreement from Senator Reid, that would be an amendment brought up on the floor to the bill, to the Manchin Toomey bill, brought up by one or two U.S. senators, two Democrats who are vulnerable right now, needed to protect their butts on gun rights anyway, so it would have helped out Reid to bring that up as an amendment to strengthen the bill, to give restoration of rights back under federal law so that people can get rights restored. At the last minute, the day before, Schumer threw a fit and got Reid to pull the amendment, which I pulled my support from Manchin Toomey because that was part of the deal. The concept again was to gain ground, not lose ground, protect rights, get a background check that's workable, even though it quote unquote wouldn't solve any problems, but if that's what the American people really want anyway, we're not going to be obstinate about it, we'll go along with it as long as we get all this back. You know, supposedly a compromise is you give up something and you get something back. The other side's compromise has always been we give up something and get nothing. We would have gotten more out of this and given up virtually nothing, because quite honestly, how many of you in this room would sell a gun to somebody you don't know? I don't see any hands go up. Because you want to make sure if you sold a gun to somebody, they're not a disqualified person. Because you don't want the civil liability, and you don't want the criminal liability. So it made a whole lot of sense, and it gave us a whole lot of protections. And it allowed gun dealers at the same time to sell their inventories out of state. It allowed gun dealers to cross state lines to sell guns at gun shows in a different state. It gave us all kinds of stuff we could never get any other way. And unfortunately, Schumer sabotaged part of it, and some gun groups sabotaged part of it by not telling the truth about what Manchester really did or didn't do. If anything, it quote-unquote gave you more protection against gun registration because it put penalties in the law and gave it teeth under the current law. They made the argument in Manchester it didn't say anything about prohibiting the gun registration system. The reason it didn't is that's already the current law. You didn't have to put that in Manchester. It already exists. Just the current law had no teeth. Manchester only put the teeth into the law. So again, I stuck my neck out because I thought it was the right thing to do. I still think it's the right thing to do. And in my home state of Washington, to try and sabotage this anti-gun initiative I talked about earlier, I also worked to try and get one in Washington State. We have a state handgun registry. If you buy a handgun in Washington State, it goes to the state database. Part of the deal was you get your background check, and the database goes bye-bye. And guess what? We took the moral high ground, and the anti-gunners sabotaged it and killed it because they wanted to go to the ballot with something more extreme, but we looked reasonable, and they didn't. It's important to position yourself like that for future battles and to gain public support. Because like it or not, the majority of people don't own firearms. There's a lot of people, 1/3 are totally solidly with us, 1/3, hate our guts, and the other third usually side with us, but they don't on background checks. I don't want them to continue sliding to the other side. I want to show them that they should be with us on everything. Any other questions? All the way in the back.
Mr. Gottlieb, I was wondering if you could talk briefly about reciprocity for various concealed weapons permits with the various letter prefixes, whether it's Virginia, Arizona, Florida, and Utah, concerning the state of Pennsylvania and the Attorney General. I wonder if you talk about ways in which we as citizens, New Jersey, and PA could hopefully try to remedy this situation if possible.
Well, it doesn't help you in New Jersey a whole lot because they don't give out enough permits to give you reciprocity with.
I'm in Utah, non-resident Utah. Basically, if you have a non-resident Utah and you're using an EA right now, it would be technically breaking the law based on
I think the Attorney General has just decided that he won't accept the Utah permit anymore.
Actually, it's a she, but I feel
A she. Yeah, okay. Unfortunately, the way those laws are written in most states of reciprocity, some law enforcement officer or attorney general gets to make the decision. I don't obviously agree with the decision, but I don't know what we can do about it. The way the law in Pennsylvania is written, she's got the power to do that. So I don't know how to stop that.
Well, I have another point I want to make if possible. The Florida permit, there was a gentleman who was a Florida resident who was pulled over by Maryland State Trooper or transportation police officer earlier in winter this year, who asked the gentleman, "Where is your gun?" If Maryland refuses to recognize the Florida permit, how is it they're having access to the database? I know your technology is...
I read that on the internet, so I know exactly what you're talking about. And I'm not sure that, quote unquote, they really knew through a database that he had a Florida permit. I've checked with Florida on that, and Florida doesn't put that database out for states like Maryland to get their hands on. So either the person wasn't honest about what happened or mentioned he had the permit to them, or they were able to track something else about the person and a gun, but they didn't get it because he had that permit.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's urban myth. There's a lot of urban myths out there.
Thank you.
Yes?
So you mentioned about the, you talked about the argument for background checks and where the general public feeling is on that. And one of the things that's always intrigued me is why no one really persistently challenges the position that the government and the media take, which essentially is the position that on background checks, the general numbers of sales, that was before the current bill took place. You hear people saying, 40% of all the sales take place background check, right? Which is old. It used to be that, but now it's not. And I'm curious as to whether, I don't expect you to talk about planned legislation, but whether you think it would be an effective strategy to actually challenge media outlets that promulgated this kind of stuff because they should know better?
Well, it's interesting you say that, because today I have a column in the Daily Oklahoman newspaper, the Columbus Dispatch, and 3 or 4 other newspapers, and a bunch more should be breaking over the weekend, dealing exactly with that. Basically, the catch line on it is that, you know, Bloomberg is lying his way to heaven by putting out this information, and the media is taking it without quote-unquote fact-checking any of it, and just putting this information out. With the 3 big lies being his latest one, on the 75 school shootings since Sandy Hook, which is not true, and 2 other ones. One, the 40% figure of guns that are sold without a background check. For everybody in the room, the real story on that is that's a 20-year-old or so study that was done prior to the Brady bill being in effect for the federal background check, based on data that existed before we had a background check, and so it's totally discredited and is meaningless. And the real number is between 10 and 12% is the best estimate. So the 40% is off by, you know, a factor of 400%. And then, of course, the third big lie that they talked about as well, which was, let's see, the 40% figure, the 75%, and oh yes, well, the 40% figure, by the way, the Washington Post has given it 3 Pinocchios as one of the biggest lies of the year. And the Washington Post is not one of our friends. And then there's a few other lies in there that Bloomberg has thrown out as well that they pick on, that the media has accepted as fact, regurgitate, and quote-unquote don't fact-check. And I do pat CNN on the back for eventually fact-checking the 75 school shooting figure. And that column is running this weekend in papers all across the country.
Yeah, of course, before Bloomberg started, the president was saying it. And MSNBC were all over it like Iraq.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, I don't understand how no one challenges that.
Well, we do challenge it. The problem is getting the media to quote-unquote be the megaphone so that people know we challenged it. You know, talk